Welcome to Excel Campus. My name is John, and this is the third video in a three-part series on macros and VBA. In the last video, we wrote a macro that creates a nice summary report of all the sheets in the workbook. We learned some important coding techniques like how to use variables, write a for next loop, use the offset property, and add formulas to the worksheet. Andy is starting to see how VBA will save him a lot of time with the boring repetitive tasks and allow him to spend more time on the fun and creative parts of his job. So in this video, we're going to build this user form that will allow us to export all the sheets out of the workbook into individual files. So one process Andy goes through every month is he has to copy each of these sheets into an individual file and then send that to the sales rep. So this form will allow us to automate that entire process. Now I just wanted to warn you that some of the concepts in this video are a little bit more advanced than the previous two videos. So don't worry if you don't fully grasp them right away. At the end of the video, I'll tell you a little bit more about the VBA Pro course, which contains 2 dedicated modules on user forms and has a ton of videos on how to create these user forms and interact with them and all that stuff. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start with this file that Andy receives and add our user form to it. So I'm going to hit Alt F11 on the keyboard to open the VB editor, and you can see here is our file in the project window here, and I'm just going to go to the insert menu up here and choose user form, and that's let me move the toolbox over. That's added this forms folder right here with user form 1 in it, and you'll also see user form 1 right here in the code window as well. So you can go ahead and resize this form and change it up how you like. Now the user form has properties. So if you select the user form, you'll see in the properties window down here there's a bunch of different properties for the user form. Here's the name of the user form. The caption here, this would basically be the caption up here at the top of the window, and we can change this right here. So I want to call this export sheets, so I'm just going to type it right in there, and then there's a bunch of other properties for the user form here as well. I'm not going to go into all these, but these can all be changed right here. So the next thing we want to do is add some controls to our form. So if you select the form here, you'll see the toolbox window comes up over here, and these are all the controls like the buttons, the list box, checkboxes, all these different types of controls you can add to the form. If you don't see this window, there's a button for the toolbox right here, just toggles it on and off, so just click that. So the first thing we're going to do is add a list box, and again this is just going to contain a list of all the sheets in the workbook. So I'm just going to draw out this list box here, just select that list box control and left click and draw it out. And then basically that'll put our list box there. And you'll also notice that there's properties down here for the list box as well. So here's the name of the list box. I actually want to just rename this to list box sheets, something like that. So this will be a little easier to reference in our code. And then the list box also has a bunch of different properties down here. And I'm not going to go into all those right now, but that's where you can change those. And then we want to add one other button, or we want to add the button here. So another control would be the button. So we're going to add our export button right here. I'm just going to draw it out. You can just left click within the button to change the caption here. So we want to call this export, something like that. And then the button has properties down here as well. Okay, so now that we've got our form kind of drawn out and designed here, we now need to add some code behind it to do certain things. Because if we were to run the form right now, and you can just run it by pressing the run button here, basically that'll run the form, and you can see here's our form above the Excel application, but there's nothing in the list box yet. If we hit the export button, it doesn't do anything. So it's basically just a skeleton form, and we need to add some code to it. So I'm just going to hit the X here to close the form. That'll jump us back to the VB editor. So the form, the user form over here actually has a code module behind it. So we see the user form here. If you right click on it, you can press this view code button, and that'll basically open up the code window and the code module behind the form. So we're still in user form 1. You can see that up here on the top menu bar as well, user form 1, and we're in the code module for user form 1. So this is where we can add macros for the user form to start programming the user form. So the first macro we want to add is when the user opens the user form, we want to list all the sheets in the list box there. So that's the first thing we need to do. And basically, we can program the different events for the user form. So if in this drop down here on the left side, you'll see all the controls here within the user form. And one of those is user form. So if I select user form, that'll automatically add the click event here, the click event for the user form. And that means if the user was to just click anywhere on the form, this code or this macro would run. Now we don't really want that. That's not really useful for this situation. But what we do want is if you go to the procedure drop down over here, again, this is all the events. This is going to list all the events for the user form. So we have a user form here. This is all the different events we can choose for the user form. And we want the initialize event. So I'm going to select initialize. That's added the macro for the user form initialize event. And the initialize event runs when the user opens the form. So when the form opens up, this code within the initialize event will run. And this is where we want to put the code to basically populate our list box. So I'm just going to delete this click event here. This is not useful, and I'll just get that out of the way. So basically here we want to add some code to populate our list box. And we're basically just going to loop through all the sheets in the workbook and then add each sheet to the list box. So it's very similar to the last video. I'm going to declare a variable here, lsheet as long. It's going to hold a number. And then we just need to loop. So we're going to do basically the same for next loop that we did in the last video. So for lsheet equals 1 to this time we're just going to say worksheets.count. And then hit enter, and then down here I'll just put next lsheet to end our loop. So now we just basically need the line of code that's going to add the sheet name to the list box. So right here I'm going to type the word me and then hit a dot. And me is basically a shortcut reference to the user form object here. So when you type me and then hit the dot, you're going to see all the properties and methods for the user form listed right here. So these are all these properties, like that caption property we changed. And then you'll also get all the members of the user form as well. So if we type listbox, you'll see our listbox.sheets or listbox sheets control right here. So I'm going to tab that, and then if I hit a dot again, that'll show all the properties and methods for the listbox control. So these are all the properties here. The method we want to use right now is add item. So I'm just going to select that. And then basically here, all we need to do is reference the worksheet name. So I'm going to say worksheets, and then the basically the variable dot name. So this is going to add an item to the list box in the user form, and that item will be the name of the worksheet for the number of the sheet that we're in within the loop. So that's really all we need to then populate the list box. So let's go ahead and try this out. So to run the form, if you double click here on the user form object over here, that'll show the form again. And then you can just hit the run button right here, and that's going to go ahead and run the form. And you'll see now it's listed all the sheets here within the workbook in the list box right here. So this is great. We got all of our sheets here. Now we need to program the export button to export these sheets. Because if I press export right now, you can see that it still doesn't do anything. So we need to program that. Okay, so I'm just going to close the form again. That'll jump us back into the VB editor. And now again, I want to view the code for the list box, or I'm sorry, for the form here. And I actually want to program the export button. So, and add an event for the export button. So one way to do that is if you just double click on the button, that's going to open up basically the command button click event right here. So again, this will be the code that will run when the user clicks the button. And I probably should have renamed the command button. I typically rename the command buttons. I forgot to do that, but it's just called command button 1. So that's how we'll reference our export button. So there's a few things we need to do when the user clicks the export button, and I'm just going to list them out here so we can kind of describe what we're going to do prior to actually coding it up. So the first thing we're going to need to do is loop through the list box, and then as we're looping through it, we need to copy out each sheet and then save it as a new file. Save as new file. Sorry, it's hard to type and talk at the same time. Okay, so we're going to loop through the list box and copy out each sheet and save it as a new file. So again, we're going to use a for next loop for this. So I'm going to go ahead and declare a variable again. We'll just use the same lsheet as long. to keep it easy. And down here, or basically here, we're going to say, we're going to put a space there. We're going to say for L sheet, and this time we're going to say equals 0, and I'll explain that in a minute, 2, and then again we're going to reference a list box. So I'm going to say me.listbox sheets.list count, and list count will return the number of sheets, or I'm sorry, the number of items within the list. So basically this property here is going to return the total number of items. In this case, I believe we have 9 sheets, so this would list 9. Now, why did I start with 0? Well, list boxes are basically 0-based indexed, and what that means is the first item in the list is actually referenced with the number 0 instead of the number 1. So it's a little bit confusing, but basically just remember they're 0-based indexed, and what that means is that we're going to take the total list count, and we're actually going to need to subtract 1 from the total list count. So we're going to go to 0 to 9 minus 1 would be 8. And then we're going to need to copy each sheet out and save it as a new file. So down below that, I'm just going to say next L sheet to close off our loop here. And then basically we'll put the code to copy the sheets and save them as a new file right here. So the first thing I want to do is get the name of the item that we're currently at in the list within the loop, which would be our sheet name. And I'm going to use a variable. I'm going to set a variable. So up here, I'm just going to declare another variable. We're going to call this sheet as, in this case, we're going to use a string type variable, which will hold text. And then down here, we're going to say sheet equals me.listbox sheets.list. And the list property, basically, if we feed it our we're going to feed it our integer, or I'm sorry, our long variable here. Basically, that's going to return the name of the item, that sheet name, within the whatever item we're in within the loop. So we're basically setting sheet equal to the sheet name within the loop here, and now we just need to copy out the sheet. So I'm going to use another variable, and I'm going to declare another variable up here. This one is going to be an object, a workbook object. So I'm going to say WB as workbook. And you can see as I start typing workbook, we have the workbook object here. You'll notice this little icon next to the workbook object. That icon represents an object. So it's not necessarily a data type. In this case, it's an object, and it's just good to know those, because when we set the object, so now actually up here before our loop, I'm going to set WB. I'm going to use the set keyword, WB equals active workbook. So this is going to set the WB equal to the active workbook, because when we are going through our list here and copying the sheet out to a new workbook, that new workbook is going to become the active workbook, and that'll get confusing when we go back to then save the next one within the loop. So we first want to set WB equals to the active workbook, and this variable is basically going to hold the object that refers to the workbook that we're currently in right now, this workbook here. So we can refer to it even though it's not going to always be the active workbook. So in this case, we're going to say WB, down here we're going to say WB.worksheets, and then we're going to reference sheet here, the sheet name .copy. So this line of code here is just going to copy out the sheet out of the workbook. So within this workbook that we're in, this workbook that contains all these sheets here, we're going to take whatever sheet we're in within the loop on the list and then copy it out. When we hit copy, this is basically going to do the same thing if you were to right click the tab name and go to move or copy and copy a sheet to a new workbook. So once it's copied to a new workbook, the active workbook will then become that new workbook that's just created with that one single sheet in it. And all we have to do is save it with the new file name. So we're going to say active workbook.save as. We're going to use the save as method. When I hit a space here, you'll see there's some parameters for the save as method. The first one is file name. So this would be the full file path where we want to save this particular file. So we kind of need to build out this file path here. And I have a folder on my computer here that I want to save these to. So I'm just going to hit Control-C to copy this file path here. And then basically, I'm going to first start with that. So I'm going to put a double quotes here because this is text. It also needs to end with basically this backslash here, and then I'll hit double quotes again. And then I'm going to use the ampersand to basically join this string, because now we want to have the file name. We want to specify the file name. And in this case, I want the file name to be the same as the sheet name, because the sheet name is the rep or the employee's name. So that'll be a good description of the file is the employee's name. So we're going to say sheet And then we also have to have the extension here. So I'm going to say .xlsx and wrap that in double quotes as well. So that'll be our full file path with basically the folder we want to save it in. The file name here is fsheet, and then the extension. So that's just going to concatenate or join that entire string there. Now the only other thing I need to specify here is the file format. When we're saving .slsx files, we need to specify the file format. It's this new file format. So basically I'm going to type file format here, colon =, and then basically the file format is 51. So basically when you're referencing those parameters there, if you put the parameter name and then the colon =, that'll allow you to basically reference the parameter, and then in this case the code for those new file extensions is 51. So don't worry about knowing all that right now. Just know that if you're saving .xlsx files, you need file format 51. Okay, so that's going to copy the sheet, save it as a new file, and then the last thing we want to do is take that that workbook that we're in and close it. So we'll say active workbook dot close. We're going to use the close method there, and basically that'll close the workbook. There's one parameter when you're closing the workbook, save changes. We'll just set this to false. That way the computer won't prompt us with a little message box asking us if we want to save it. It just will not save any changes. And we don't need it to save changes because we just saved the workbook in the line before anyways. So now we have our loop. Basically, this is all we need for our loop. It's just going to loop through all the sheets within the list, or all the items in the list box, and then copy each one out to a new workbook and save that workbook to this folder right here with the sheet name as the file name, and close the workbook. So let's test this out and see if it works. So again, I can go to my Userform here. You can also run the code from the initialize event in the code window, and I'm just going to hit run here, and basically so now we just have a list of all of our sheets here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the export button, and that's going to start exporting those sheets. You'll see they kind of flash up in the foreground here. They're opening, they're copying out, saving as, and then closing. So now you can see it's finished now. It's returned me to the VB editor. Sometimes if it returns you to the VB editor like this, you actually want to go back to Excel. So Alt F11, you'll see the export sheets form is still open here. So we now want to close it. Eventually you could add some code here to show a message box when it's done, when it's complete. Maybe you want to show how much time it took to do that. But now let's go check that folder. So I'm going to pull up that folder, and you can see in that folder that we specified, here's all of our files here that we just saved, basically ran that export. So if I open one of these, I'll open the file for Anne. You can see here's Anne's report, just Anne's sheet here, her tab only. The file is saved with her name, and we can now send this file to her. We can email it to her every month or quarter or however often we have to do that. I only covered the very basics in this video, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can turn your macros into professional-looking applications with Userforms. Andy's boss is impressed, and I'm sure your boss will be too. In this video series, we started with the very basics of writing a macro, and quickly progressed to more advanced coding techniques. I hope you got a glimpse of how useful and powerful VBA can be. It will save you a ton of time and help you advance in your career. In the next few days, I will be sending you information on my VBA Pro course. This course is designed for anyone looking to automate common tasks in Excel and build applications and add-ins. It covers beginner to advanced topics and is designed to help you learn in a structured, step-by-step manner. Plus, I will be offering a limited time bonus that includes hanging out with me. So be on the lookout for an email from me within the next few days that will contain all the details. Please leave a comment below with any questions about this video. I really appreciate your feedback and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.